to wanderers at dawn of the world full of war. Early sunrise, I gave promise. You said always, and we run and dance. I'm following, I'm preaching, you're my church, I'm yin, and yeah, you're my east, I'm your ass. And no one is right, or this world is so blind. Feel no doubt, sing your restless and always, and we run and dance.
Welcome back to Garden-Wise Adventures. This week's video is on composting. Now I wanted to start back near my compost pile, but the shade from the trees is just really bad. And you can't see my face very well, which maybe is a good thing, I don't know. But anyway, we're gonna start here. So this is mid-season for leaves, and I use my leaves and garden scraps to make my compost. And I just wanted to kind of show you my process. Now my process is a little bit slower method. It fully composts down in 1 year. When I lived in California, I could fully turned out compost in 6 weeks. That took a lot of work. I had to pay attention to my mix of ingredients. I kept it watered. I would turn it twice in that 6-week period. Now I don't have that same kind of time and energy, so I do a compost pile that produces full compost in 1 year. But it's very simple, it's very easy. And let's go show you what I put in it, what I keep out of my compost pile, and how I turn out good compost in a year and how I use it. Now here we are at my compost pile with all the ingredients that I use. There's a pile of leaves. I have a full bin of garden waste. I have my tools. Wheelbarrow is very important. I have a screen because I do have a lot of mulch that ends up in my compost. You can kind of see the chunks that end up in there. And I don't want those in my actual garden beds, but I do use those chunks in different areas. I have my shovel and garden fork and my gloves. So let's talk about what I put in my compost and what I keep out of it. Now my compost bin is not easy access from my house. That is generally the reason I don't put kitchen waste in my compost bin. It just takes too long to run from the kitchen to here. I've tried finding different ways to save it so that for when I come up here. But it just ends up stinking and getting rotten, and it just doesn't end up here. If you had a way to build compost bin closer to your kitchen, maybe you could put your kitchen waste in your compost bin. It is actually very good for your compost. Do not use meats. Meats they will compost, but they end up stinking, and they also end up bringing in pests like rats and dogs and stuff like that. Now, as you can see here, I have all the garden waste that I pulled out of my garden last week and this week. It's not chopped down very small. Sometimes I'll chop it smaller if I have the energy, and sometimes I don't. It seems to work out just fine either way, as long as it's not really woody. If it's really woody, for example, like my basil right here, I will break that up into smaller pieces so that it composts down easier. The other things I keep out of my compost bin are any of my plants that seed heavily and that are just too rampant in my yard. I don't put catmint in here. I don't put my oregano in here. I try to keep any weed seeds out of my compost pile. That way I'm not spreading problems. There are things that I will put in here that I like to spread. I love my dill to spread, so I put my dill seeds and all in here. I'll throw coriander seeds, I'll leave the coriander seeds, the ones that I don't use. Those can go into the compost pile. And lettuce. There's a ton of lettuce seeds that end up in here. Also, you can see my old dead alyssum. That will also reseed. I don't mind my alyssum reseeding. It hasn't become a problem for me. So just watch, this is a colder compost method. There's the hot compost methods where you do it quickly. That'll kill a lot of the seeds. This is a slower method, and the seeds don't tend to die. Now, as you can see, the main reason for success in making compost in a year's time is this sprinkler head right there. It waters this bin and this bin when my garden gets watered. So let's look at the compost now and see how I use it. I'm sorry about the shading on my face and the wind. We've just got to take conditions as they come in Utah. So I'm going to show you how I sift out my compost and how I use it. So I take my screen. I just used regular garden screen. Made this wooden form. It's duct tape. I use duct tape on everything. It is nailed, but the nails weren't holding, so I put duct tape on it. And it works beautifully. So I just stick it in my wheelbarrow. Throw a shovel full or two of compost in it. Sift out the heavy chunks. And as you can see, there's a lot of mulch in that. So what I do with the mulch is I don't want to throw it through the compost again. I just toss it back into my garden. Easy as that. So let's see if we can get a wheelbarrow full of this to put in my garden beds.
We are two wanderers at dawn of the world full of war. Early sunrise.
I did have a much larger sift when I was in California because I used it so much more often. A lot of times if I don't have time to sift out the compost in the year, what I'll do is I'll just take it mulch and all as is and throw it around my fruit trees. That's a really excellent fertilizer for fruit trees. So if I were to have the time to sift out my compost all the time, I'd probably build a larger sifter for it. Okay, let's show you what I've done. Don't know if you can see in here, but I've shoveled out most of the compost, most of the unfinished compost and finished compost. I got a wheelbarrow here with compost in it, finished compost. And then I threw the rest in this pile to be dealt with later. And I'm also going to be using the top part of this pile to help make my new pile of compost. So let's look at this compost. This is what I call black gold. Now I'm going to link another video that I did on compost that talks a little bit more about the processes of how compost is formed. But the finishers of compost are these little guys. And there's just dozens of them in here. Well, more than dozens, there's hundreds. There's so many of these little ones. And I'm going to leave them in here. And they're going to go into my garden beds. Let's show you how I incorporate this into my garden beds. Okay, I'm sorry I'm a mess, but this is real life garden. This is what you look like when you play around with compost. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a layer of that gorgeous compost on top of my beds. Now I got, 3/4 full of a wheelbarrow full of finished compost out of my pile that I did. And I'll probably get about 3 more wheelbarrow loads like that out of that compost pile. I might be able to get maybe 5 total wheelbarrow loads of finished compost, which I think is So let me show you what I do to my bed. Now, I'll show you in a little bit, but these are the beds that I chopped up the leaves with my lawnmower and mowed, and mixed them with my grass and threw that on top of these beds as a mulch. So what I'm going to do with the compost is I'm just going to throw a good layer on top of that, and next spring I will just mix it in. So here it is. Isn't that gorgeous? I love that dark color. Now, compost has a ton of nutrients, micro and macro nutrients, that will be available for my plants for next year. So let's go up to the top of the hill and show you how I make this compost.
We are two wanderers at dawn of the world full of war. Early sunrise, I gave promise. You said always, and we run and dance. I'm by your wind, I'm reaching.
Okay, here's what the final bin looks like. We're going to get leaves on the top of that. Here's a bin full of unfinished compost that I'm going to sift out and use the good stuff and finish out, and then we're going to put a new compost pile in this bin. This is what's left of the garden waste. Okay, I finished one pile. Next week, when I have a little bit more time, I will go and finish the other pile. So I'll just take more leaves as they fall, my unfinished compost that I have here, and I will sift out as much as I can of the good compost and use it in my gardens out of this bed, or out of this bin. If I get tired of doing that, I will just throw everything into the flower beds and around my fruit trees. Leave the mulch, leave the chunks in it, and it'll be fine. I will leave one last wheelbarrow full of unfinished compost to finish doing that bed. So that's all there is to it. Just be careful what you put into it. Mix it with your finished compost, not a ton of it. You're not making, new compost with a ton of old compost. It's just a sprinkling over the top. By the time I finish with these beds, you can see the brown lines on the fence. That's my normal fill line. So all 3 of these beds are completely full to the top of the fence with leaves. And by the end of the year, they are down to what you saw that they were. Enjoy the rest of the fall. Get out to your garden. Make yourself some compost. If you like my videos, please like and subscribe them and share them with your friends. This is probably the last week where I will have 3 videos in a week. I will for sure have 1 video a week going forward through the rest of the winter. It'll be my design series, and I'll put a link to that playlist. And if I get other things that come up throughout the season that I can video, I will do that. So get outside, enjoy the winter, enjoy the rest of this fall, and have a wonderful garden adventure.